Hey everyone, thanks for taking the time to join us here at No Turning Back. Today, Stan and I have just a really amazing conversation with a great leader and friend of ours, Wes Moore. For those of you that know the name Wes Moore, or you're familiar with his writings, his personal history, his current work as the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, whatever it may be, if you've ever had the chance to listen or interact with Wes, you would remember it. This is a person that I guarantee if you haven't heard about him yet, you will. He is a leader that our nation will get to know more and more over the years. He's a young leader, but with an amazing background. He talks about his upbringing in Baltimore and New York, his childhood experiences at a military academy, which really was a forging for him, put him on a very powerful path towards what he is now today, a leader that we are all lucky to have in this country, to his current work as the CEO of just a major nonprofit trying to fight poverty around the country. This is a discussion that I know will stick with me for a long time. I've been really privileged to have spent time with Wes over the years, know him personally, can call him a friend, which I feel lucky for, but it's also incredible to have folks like that you can look at and learn from constantly, the way they communicate their message, the way they focus on the mission of the organization, and the way they relentlessly try to improve themselves as a leader, not for their own personal benefit, but for the purpose of the mission they try to serve. Wes is just one of those unique, one in a generation type people, coupled with a level of humility and just desire to constantly improve. That is a very unique combination. I'm sure you'll learn as much from this as Stan and I did. Thanks for joining us.
Wes, thanks so much for taking the time to join Stan and myself here. We really look forward to this discussion. Obviously, we've all known each other for years. Yeah. Stan and I are both just great admirers of the work you've done historically, where you are now. But like we'd like to start all these conversations, could you give listeners just a little bit about your story, where you are now, and how you got there, which is, as folks that know you know, just an amazing story to hear.
Well, let me start it for you, Wes. You went to Valley Forge Military Academy, and I think you got your big break in the movie Taps, if I remember correctly. And you can take it from there.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right. Well, no, honestly, and it's a real pleasure joining both of you. I have just the deepest level of respect, admiration, and just love for both of you and what you not just have how you continue to lead and serve, but just the example you set. And I think that, in many ways, my life and my trajectory has been incredibly uneven. But I think it's also been the fire that I think has kind of really set out how I try to view not just my days, but the things that I decide to take part in. Was raised by a single mom, myself and my two sisters. My father died when I was young, and my mother just in her late 20s, unexpectedly, because my father died in front of us. I mean, she unexpectedly became a widow with 3 kids that she was going to raise on her own, and that was not the life that she had prepared for or expected or dreamt about. I ended up we were living down in Maryland. My mom was having a really difficult time with the transition. And so she called up my grandparents, her parents, and said that she needed help. And so my mom had us go move up to the Bronx to go live with them. And my grandfather was a minister in the South Bronx. And my grandmother was a school teacher. And I had a lot of challenges coming up, where, I was asked to, leave schools. And I was, I had handcuffs on my wrist by the time I was 11 years old. Living in the Bronx. And then, and General Chris was right. By the time I was 13, I was sent away to a military school. And I had a mandatory year there, even though it ended up becoming one of the most important experiences of my life, because I think it gave me a chance to just both remake an identity that I think was just not going in the right place back at home. But also I think it introduced leadership in a way that mattered to me. And it's funny because sometimes people talk about the military. They're like, oh yeah, it's great that you got discipline. It's great that they woke you up early. It's great that you did push-ups. I mean, and yeah, they did all that. I woke up early and I did push-ups and all that kind of stuff. But that wasn't what changed things, right? I mean, I honestly think one of the biggest things that changed wasn't the fact that I got yelled at a lot or whatever. It was they introduced leadership, and were incredibly intentional about introducing leadership into my life. And I felt like it happened at a time when, I would have picked it up from somewhere. I'm just happy that they were the ones who introduced it to me first, because I saw for a lot of my friends and colleagues and people I came up with, they were getting leadership training too. It just was in a very different frame. And so when I ended up actually finishing high school, I joined the Army right out of high school, and eventually went off to junior college, Valley Forge Junior College. Actually got my commission in the Army out of there. Finished my undergrad experience at Hopkins. Went off to England for grad school, but then relatively soon after finishing my grad school experience, I linked back up with the 82nd Airborne Division, and had my first deployment over in Afghanistan in 2005 and 2006. And it's interesting because I think about what I do now, where I lead one of the largest anti-poverty organizations in the country, where over the past 32 years we've dispensed over $3 billion into the poverty fight. And I remember when they first approached me, I was kind of like, I've never done philanthropy before. So I'm not sure if you're kind of reaching out to the right guy. But then I actually thought about it. And I said, when I was deployed, I wasn't sitting there with my unit thinking to myself, man, this is going to be great when I run a foundation one day. Right. Or when I was working in finance, I wasn't sitting there and, working on deals and doing M&A transactions thinking this is going to be really useful when I run Robinhood. These weren't things that were anywhere like figments of my mind about what I would be doing eventually. But I kind of feel like in many ways, between my life experiences, between my time in the military, between my time in finance, it was actually the perfect preparation for the role that the chair that I sit in now, the role that I think we take now. And honestly, in many ways, the perfect preparation for not just being at Robinhood or working on poverty issues or working in service. It was the perfect preparation for right now, because I do think there's also a difference between what these past 8-9 months have introduced, not just in terms of our society, but specifically in terms of all of our work and how exactly we have to think about response, how we have to think about, keeping your teams going, how we have to think about the fact that, when people say to me, they're like, what does the bottom of this look like? The honest answer is, I don't know. Only thing as I know is that we're not there yet. Right. And you have to be able to walk into that knowing that this thing will get tougher before it gets easier. But we just have to be able to prepare for that.
Wes, I'm going to aim you at the young side of our audience now, people who are some years behind us, even way behind me, even still a little behind you, because you talked about the things that prepared you, but it wasn't an intentional plan. You didn't know you'd be at Robinhood. We didn't know we'd be in this environment. And yet you did a number of different things. You went to military school because they sent you, but then you made the most of it. But then you put together some different bona fides on your resume. You went to Johns Hopkins, you went into the Army, you were a Rhodes Scholar, you didn't just go to England. You did a number of things, and in many ways, I could make an argument that someone could say, well, hey, Wes, decide what you want to be and go there. and you go to Deutsche Bank, and you go to all these different things, but as you describe, it actually fits together a little bit like a puzzle to give you a breadth and depth. Can you talk more about that towards people who might be just an age where they've got opportunities trying to figure out how to angle themselves?
Yeah, and honestly, it's a battle, right? Because I think even still to this day, my mom's like, "You're ever going to figure out what you want to do with yourself and stay there for a while?" Because I do think it is something where you do feel this constant state of pressure. And the pressure is kind of twofold, right? The pressure is both the stability pressure, and the pressure is the business card pressure, right? Where on the stability piece, it is this idea of saying you want to make sure that you have something that can take care of you and your family, particularly because, you know, for so many of us, we have responsibilities that far outstretch us, right? Where in some cases you're taking care of multiple generations at the same time. So that measure of stability actually is important. And then there's this question of where every single conversation starts off with the kind of the basic question of, so what do you do? Or where do you work? And you got to make sure you got the good answer for that, or the cool answer. And you know, so much of every element of a conversation goes depending on what your first answer to that question is.
Yeah.
Right. If you say a cool enough answer or a cool enough business or a cool enough job, the conversation continues. If you don't, everyone's like, oh, it's so great to meet you. And they're looking around the room to try to find someone else to have a conversation with. And so there is a very real and innate pressure to that, which I totally get. And that I totally do understand. I think that the key thing that I would say to people who are trying to, trying to figure this out, and particularly people who are younger and still in the place of trying to figure out their destinies and their careers. One is, even though I feel like, even though people can say, yes, you had time in the military or time in Washington or time in finance, and they felt so disparate. The thing about them is, though, each and every one of them were honing a skill set that I still use very much to this day. I use what I learned in the military every day. Even though I'm not dealing with paratroopers, I'm not dealing with people in uniform anymore. The things that I learned, the lessons that I learned, were remarkably transferable into everything else that I thought about doing later on in life. I think about my role in finance. I am not working on mergers and acquisitions anymore. But I know that my understanding and the skill set that I learned there those skill sets were remarkably transferable. The time in the startup world, remarkably transferable. And so I think the first piece I'd say to people is don't worry as much, especially earlier stage in your career, about saying like, am I at my dream role? Am I at the job that I'm going to have so much fun talking about at the holidays with family and that kind of thing? Skill set, transferable skill sets. Work on those things that these are things that are going to help me and balance me and propel me no matter what is going to happen in 3 or 5 or 7 years, because I think, as we've seen very quickly, things change, industries change, economies change. Skill sets and transferable skill sets oftentimes don't. And that's the thing that's going to make you attractive, no matter what ends up happening with the larger macro dynamics that you just don't have the same measures of control over. And I'd say the second thing that you want to think about is it's kind of the test I have, that it's the heartbeat test. Like, what are the things that make your heart beat a little bit faster? Because, the thing that we all ask for in life is not just this sense of fulfillment, but what is it that gives you the greatest potential to be great? And I have never in life met anyone who is great at what they do and they're not passionate about it. Right. I mean, and really, I've never met anyone who's like, I'm like, you're like best in class at what you do. And you ask them, do you love what you do? And they say, it's okay. I've never met that. Right. The only consistent thing I needed from people who are really great at what they do is they're like, I love this. I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed thinking about it. I'm in the middle of the shower thinking about this. And I think that's what makes them great, is you're not going to outwork them. You're not going to outcompete them, because they embrace it, right? They embrace this suck. And I think that that's something that becomes so important for people as you're looking for the things you want to get done. And so, you have to focus on skill sets. You have to focus on that thing. But I think when it comes to this idea of saying, are you doing what it is that you truly care about? I think it really does become a very personal question for people. And it's not, how do you fit into this role, or how do you fit into this group, or this is a really hot industry. If you want to be great, love it. If you don't love it, I don't want to compete with people that do, because they will beat me every single time. Out of the gate, they will beat me running through the tape. And that's not a race that I choose to run. And so that's something I would also say to people as you're trying to figure out what is it that you want to do, and how do you want to spend your time.
That's classic. I remember a young paratroop sergeant one time, I asked him how he was doing. We were in the field. He goes, "Sir, I love it, but sometimes I get tired of loving it."
That's so good. And you know what? That person will not be beaten.
Exactly.
They won't be beaten.
Yeah.
You will not out
You won't
paratroop.
out paratroop that.
You
that
won't out
guy.
paratroop.
Can I want to underscore a point you made, because I think it's really, really important to consider. And then I want to just ask you a question on a point that you raised. The point to underscore is you said that you were introduced to the idea of leadership in the right environment to start making the right choices. But you also gave credit to those that didn't have that opportunity, who still became leaders, but maybe not in a great way by, societal norms. And I think that's so overlooked, that there are leaders. One of my mentors in the SEAL teams used to say, leaders lead. And I thought it was just this sort of, I actually didn't get it at the time, right? This little sort of flippant argument, but it's a brilliant, simple point to say, look, leaders will find a way to lead others. And that might be, there's the student council president, and there's the leader of the tough kids that's always in trouble, but that's still a leader. I mean, Stan McChrystal, did a chapter on Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, our biggest enemy in Iraq, because he was a leader, right? So I think so the question inside of that is, like, how do we capture more young minds and give them that opportunity to be introduced to a different type of leadership, positive leadership? And Stan, I'd love to ask folks here on the podcast, when was it you realized that you were more than an individual contributor and a leader? And most of those answers, well, when I was 30, I took over my first team and I realized, I wasn't just a trader anymore. You highlight that at, in your teenage years at a military academy. What allowed you to make that pivot and not just say, I'm going to do my year and I'm going to go back to New York and hang out with my buddies?
And it was interesting, Chris, because it's also there's an addictive nature to it. And I think about my time in military school where they really do try to teach it early, where you go through your initial plebe system and you're not treated like nothing, you're treated worse than nothing. And you're just told, don't take it personal, because we're doing it to all of you. But then pretty early, you're going to actually be put in charge of something, right? And one thing I always think about is, they're going to put you in charge of something that is going to seem small and insignificant, and it is, but it's not, right? They'll put you in charge of a hallway. If the hallway is clean, we'll congratulate you. If the hallway is dirty, then Lord help you, right? And you take that very seriously. So if McChrystal is in my team or is in my squad, and he's drinking a water bottle and throws a water bottle in the hallway, well, I'm scooping him up, because I'm like, I'm not going to get in trouble because you can't find a trash can, right? And then they notice that. I'm like, all right, more, hallway's looking good, and you get promoted, right? Now I'm a team leader. Now I'm a squad leader, and let's say now I have a team, and I've got a whole squad, and so let's say someone in my squad shows up late, 5 minutes late for class. The teacher's not going to ask them, why are you late? The teacher's going to walk up to them and say, who's your squad leader? And they're going to come find me. And they're going to come to me and said, a member of your squad was 5 minutes late for my class today. Why? Well, I need to have an answer. I'm in charge. And that person's going to be 5 minutes early tomorrow, and I'll make sure of it, right? But there's this sense of this graduated sense of responsibility that exists. And, then you go from a squad leader, and then you're a platoon sergeant or a first sergeant, or whatever the case might be. Well, it's really interesting, because I actually thought about this in context where people will talk about, these, whether it's drug organizations or gangs and that type of thing, how complex they are. And in actuality, I'm like, they're really not. It's not complicated at all, actually. In fact, in many ways, it's carbon copies of military organizations and Fortune 500 companies, because when people were first targeting us, and targeting us at 8 and 9 years old, they weren't targeting you to be kingpins, right? They were targeted to be lookouts. And your job was to stand there, and if you see a cop car roll by, you see a car that does not look familiar roll by, whatever like that, your job is to yell out whatever the name of the day is or name of the week is. And the reason that we yell names is because if a cop grabs you, you can just say, get your hands off me. Since when is it a crime to yell for my friend? So that's why I'm yelling, Chris, Chris, Chris. they're not going to arrest me for yelling a name.
Mhm.
And you do that pretty well, and you get promoted. And now I'm a runner, right? My job is now to move a package from one side of town to another side of town. The reason that kids were generally recruited at 8 and 9 and 10 years old is because kids with backpacks at 8 and 9 and 10 years old generally aren't checked, right? And then from there you get promoted. Now I'm a houseman. Then I become muscle. Then I become a lieutenant, right? It's the same structure. There's nothing different about it, except there's just different names and different responsibilities. And oftentimes what ends up happening as well is the consequences are also very, very different as you continue to move up in these ranks. And so I feel like in many ways that that what we're dealing with and what we're trying to, and the best way to introduce, the best way to actually penetrate and disrupt is if we can find ways of being able to tap into the natural inclination for so many of our young boys and young girls, which are to be the alphas, right? It is to be recognized. It is to have someone acknowledge you and acknowledge your existence and find how you actually fit into this larger spectrum that we're looking for. The best way that we can really work to penetrate and disrupt so many of the things that we see is actually being able to, is in many ways to beat the enemy at their own game. And that's how do you find ways of introducing those kind of measures earlier and do it better? If you can do that, you're going to find ways of actually disrupting flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great way to look at it. Just a quick point, I'll turn it over to Stan. But Stan and I teach a course together we have for years up at Yale, and every year there's 2 students, probably more, that reach out about joining the military after school. And I give this consistent piece of advice to them that I think is counterintuitive. A, of course you should join the military, but here's why. Because it's one of the last institutions I know of that doesn't care anything about your resume. And they just want to see if your hallway's clean, right? And you have to be able to do that. And they'll build on that. And you do 4 years. And then for the rest of your life, everyone's going to see you're brilliant. You went to Yale. You're amazing. Let's put you on the fast track. The military won't do that. They're going to have the standards, and you're going to suck it up and meet the standards, or you're not. And nothing about your background helps you in that situation. So I think it's a great point. Stan.
And in fact, your resume is going to be the one thing that's going to make you tested most. Because if you think that's going to get you special treatment, good luck.
Yeah. I want to pull a little bit more on the discussion you had, because this is a pretty unique one. One of the things we saw in Iraq, of course, with Al-Qaeda in Iraq, was very dedicated people willing to fight hard against us, some suicide bombers and whatnot. And people said that they are so fundamentally driven by the ideology. But in reality, what we found was it was much closer to what you described. People want to be a part of something. They want to be shoulder to shoulder with people that they respect and admire. They want to be accepted. And so this idea that offering an alternative is often an alternative to be a part of something that they can view with some level of respect. Can you talk more about that? Because I think we talk about our society today, what could help in so many areas. How do we do that?
It's a really great question. And it's because oftentimes, and whether you're talking about the ideology of an insurgent or the ideology of a gang member or the ideology of whoever, the question really is the ideology the head or the tail? Yeah. Right? And the honest answer is, in many ways, it's not the head. Yeah. The ideology is what happens afterwards, right? The ideology is what I then introduce and indoctrinate you into after I've already got you, right? Because then at that point, I can teach you and train you anything. Then at that point, I can teach you and train you, this person is the enemy because of X, Y, and Z. This person is horrible because of A, B, or C. You need to do this because this is what is expected and this is the right thing to do. But by the time I'm actually able to work that into you, I've already got you. And I've got you from something else. That wasn't what pulled you in. What pulled you in was that sense of connection. Was that pulled you in was the fact that, you know, I now found a person who in some way, shape, or form either feels a level of, you know, simpatico, or this person feels like family, or this person wouldn't tell me something wrong, or there's a financial incentive for me to be able to participate in what's going on. That's the initial carrot. And so the idea of ideology, and people say you can't fight an ideology, you know, I get it, and I understand that. And I think understanding ideological motivations is something that does become important. However, I think what becomes more important is how do you actually interject before ideology can become something hardened? Because that's not oftentimes the entry point for a person who's willing to give their life or give their freedom or give whatever it is, their future, to this cause or to this group or to this platform or to this establishment. That's not, it's ideology oftentimes is not the thing that brings them in. It's not the head, it's the tail. And I think how do we then think about the head in a different way is really how we should be focusing our energies and our attentions.
Well, I want to build on that and take us into what's going on today in the leadership space and broadly society, and then even around the world, because it's such a critical point, right? The fractionalization that we see now, and it's been acutely, divisive over the last 10 months, given all of the pandemic, separation, et cetera, all these different factors coming together, forcing people into their sub-narratives, into their sort of ideological echo chambers. And there's a role that leaders play there, right? In order to unify groups around a common sense of purpose and focus. It's what makes us a great nation at our best. It's what binds allies in times of conflict. And you are in a unique position to see leaders across the spectrum in industry and politics, all the different worlds that you have to touch and manage. Would just love your thoughts as an opening dialogue around what you see happening there. What are we learning right now? And where do you think this is headed over the next years?
Yeah, I think, this is a really complicated time for a collection of different reasons. But one of them, Chris, you touched on, which I think is a really important one. It's because of these measures of social distancing, because of these measures of stay at home, because of this type of thing, people are actually then being forced to retreat into other areas and other places that are then they're using those places and spaces to be able to create measures of social connection, right? And oftentimes it's increased usage on whether it's social media or increased usage of other mechanisms for them to have a sense of human connection and human attachment that's not personal. And I think that will and does have very significant implications and consequences over how we think about connectivity. And I think, in many ways, this has been an absolute playground for people who want to be disruptive. This has been a playground for people who want to utilize devices and utilize, individual dark webs to be able to convince people of their thinking and convince people that no. It's everything that's going on is because of X, Y, or Z, and therefore you need to act accordingly. If that's what you then turn around and believe, and I think one of the things we've also seen though is how these measures of social isolation and how these measures of economic breakdown then end up completely coinciding with one another. If we look at heat maps of what was taking place, and this is even pre-COVID-19, if you look at heat maps of what was taking place and areas that were having the most significant issues in terms of everything from opioid abuse to spousal abuse issues to kick-ups and domestic violence to all these type of things, and you actually take a look at a heat map of economic activity inside of these other individualized areas, it's amazing how many concentric circles that you will then start seeing, where you started watching communities that were having very difficult times economically and the other social ills that then very much show themselves. increases in violence, increase in all the other aspects that we had spoken about. I'm a very, very proud Baltimore resident. I'm a very, very proud of the fact that so much of who I am is because of the place that helped raise me. I also know this is that if you look at the streak of the past 30 years in the city of Baltimore, it's been a pretty hard streak. And it's impossible to start anywhere but to be able to start economically. Where, 20 years ago, a generation ago, the largest employer in Baltimore City was Bethlehem Steel, right? So if you had a strong back and a high school degree, you had a job. Now the largest employer in Baltimore City is Johns Hopkins University. Mm. Try getting a job at Johns Hopkins with a high school degree and a strong back. And so you've seen how, as economies have changed so significantly, you also see how everything from population size, and I mean, with the exception of Detroit and Cleveland, Baltimore has lost more citizens than any other major American city over that same time period. You've seen now the fact that we have been dealing with this absolute, this heartbreakingly long stretch of violence that has taken place within the city of Baltimore, where if you look at over the past, ever since 2003, it's an amazing statistic, but ever since 2003, if you look at the amount of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that we have lost in both Iraq and Afghanistan combined, over that same time period, the amount of citizens that we have lost in Baltimore City is around the same number. I mean, we have watched this unbelievable streak of challenges that have then taken place, and I think part of that goes back to exactly the point that you're speaking about, and how do we reconcile where this issue of isolation, this issue of economic depravity and economic isolation, and how that then manifests itself in so many different ways throughout our society. The fact that we, over the last 11, weeks, have essentially watched 11 years of job growth go away. This should not be shocking to us as we're watching some of these other societal dynamics and some really problematic dynamics continue to show themselves as well. And so I think as we're talking about how do we prioritize, how do we think about ways to rebuild, how do we really think recreating economies, how do we make sure that people aren't as vulnerable in the first place? If we can address those structural challenges, we're going to do a much better job of being able to address all the secondary and tertiary issues that are now staring at us and are staring at our doorstep.
Right. You might find this interesting, Wes. You may already know it, but the U.S. Army's been doing a new program to how they select battalion and brigade commanders. And one of the changes is they're bringing them together, putting them through a battery of tests, but it also includes a blind interview. And they have a panel of some active and retired senior officers, and they have the interviewee behind essentially a panel that can't be seen. And interestingly enough, they get very different results in the outcome between how they're assessed by that panel when they can and cannot be seen. I mean, starkly different. So what I'm bringing this around to is we're in an age when charisma, where celebrity, where your loquaciousness, your style can be linked to leadership. Parse those apart for me. What's the difference between being charming and being a real leader? Because you're both.
It's interesting because I feel like people have to understand and know that leadership is just not simply, leadership is not always the fancy fun stuff. Leadership in many ways is a thing that no one pays any attention to. Leadership is, leadership when people often say like, what does it mean to be, a leader, or what are some of the criteria that you have of some top leaders? Honestly, it's not sexy stuff. It's I'm thinking about things like, what is a person's technical competence? All right. What is their ability to actually understand? Now what I'm saying, when I look at some of the best leaders, I'm not saying they are experts at everything, because they're not, and that's impossible. But what I'm saying is they know a good amount about everything that they're talking about, though, because one of the other criteria is, how do you build a good team? How do you establish, what it is to have mechanisms and people and experts in place around you, and know that your goal in every single conversation as a leader is to learn. That should actually be a prerequisite for every single leader, that in every single conversation is not just about what am I dispensing or what am I proclaiming, but what did I learn from that conversation that's helping to define and helping to interpret how I think about my next conversation. Right. But so there has to be a level of technical competence that that everyone I'm talking to is not completely speaking over my head. But what I'm saying is, but I also want to be surrounded by experts who are then helping me and educating me and informing me in every single conversation that I have. One of the other big criteria that I look at when it comes to leadership is, it's their ability to take care of their own people. And, because I learned early, and I have learned often, that if you take care of your people will take care of you. And all your blind spots, they'll make sure they're not exposed. All the things that you might be a little weaker at, they'll make sure that no one knows that. If you don't take care of your people, it's amazing how they will just sit back and cross their arms and say, "Good luck with that, sir," and then laugh in enjoyment as you crash and burn, because you're not going to be an expert at everything, and you have to make sure that your flanks are always consistently protected. And so I think, is it important to be able to go out and, communicate with your team and rah them up? It's important. It's fine. And if you can't, you need to make sure you have people on your team who know how to do that. Is it important to make sure that you can go out and communicate your message, to a wider audience? It's important. And if you can't, you got to make sure that you have people that can actually go do that. But the things that I think make our most special leaders most special is the fact that they do the things when the lights are out, when the camera is not on, when they don't feel like they're the sexy things. But what they're able to do is build a magnificent team that where everyone is on the same track, everyone is on the same sheet, and frankly, everyone considers it to be part of their job description to protect the leader. Mm-hmm. If you are running a shop where all those mechanisms are in place, then I can tell you right now, you're going to get higher and better results than anybody who can give up and give the greatest halftime speech in the history known to man. And so those are the things that I think for all leaders, you really want to work on those type of things: technical competence, building the right kind of team, taking care of your people. You can do those things, you're going to put yourself in a much better position than someone who somehow thinks that celebrity or name recognition is going to be most important. Now, you do bring up an important point, though, because there is almost this separation that we as a society really have to think hard about. And it's this difference between leadership and what gets you recognized. Right. And I think we are now watching two very different dynamics, and this push-pull that's existing, where what is it that people are focused on and what is it that they desire? And frankly, we have a lot of people who have spent a tremendous amount of time focusing on what is going to get me recognized versus what are the things that I need that once I actually get to a position that make me uniquely qualified and prepared. And I think that is something that we as a nation, we as a culture, we haven't struck that balance correct yet.
Yeah. Well said.
I want to dive in a bit to get your thoughts on mentorship, how you were personally mentored, sort of picking up where the story left off as you entered your sort of adult career, or more importantly, how do you mentor others? Because the points you're making there around leadership are so important. I mean, one of the messages that we often try to deliver in teaching about leadership is it's not what you see in the movies. It's not those glorious moments where everybody says, "Whew, if it wasn't for that halftime speech, we would have lost the game." It's you're not going to get any easy decisions because someone else will make it, right? And when you make the hard decision on a good day, only 49% of your people will be frustrated with you. Right? And when there are those fun sunshine days, you're going to be too exhausted to enjoy it. You're going to show up and say your thing, and then you got to crash because you've been working so hard. No one's going to recognize that, right? And it's back to that paratrooper. Sometimes they get tired of loving it, right? Those are the leaders that persevere, right? If you are so focused on the mission of Robin Hood, the mission of your unit, wherever you might be, right, then you lead through it, and you do all those other things are just what happens, right? But if you think it's about the glory of being a leader, then find a different career, right? But how do you translate that over and mentor others? I'm sure you must have, just waves of people trying to get on your calendar and say, hey, how do I become the next Wes?
Yeah. Well, I think about the role that mentors have played in my life and truthfully still play in my life, because I think one of the beautiful things about mentorship is it's not like, when people think mentorship, they're always like, it's the college student who's looking for a mentor. No, it's everybody. and it's a lifetime exercise. And you can call them by different names sometimes. You can call them, maybe they take on a different title or a different It's mentorship. It's people who are helping to guide your decisions. It's people who are helping to, who by their actions are helping to shape you. It's people who you are motivated by, whether you're talking about that high school kid or whether you're talking about a person who's running a Fortune 500 company. It's mentorship that they still really rely on to navigate. And actually, I think one of the things that actually I have learned is I also don't believe in this idea of the universal mentor, where it's like I go to this person for everything, because I think that's first of all, it's such a heavy weight to give to anybody. But there are certain people who are my mentors and thought leaders for certain aspects of my life. There are certain people who I'm just like, they are my mentor when it comes to being a father, right? If I got a parenting question, I'm like, I'm really having a tough time with X, Y, or Z, or, I'm having a tough time with my family on this, or I'm trying to figure out how to balance whatever it is. There are certain folks those are the folks I go to for those kind of things, because I feel like they really have that thing mastered. There might be certain things where I'm like, I got a question on how I'm going to figure out how to create a better balance sheet for my organization. And that person is the last person I ever go to about that question, right? So you kind of have this compartmentalization about what are the things and what are the roles that different people play that really help to get you to be optimal in the question that you have. Part of the way I think about it, even in terms of, the who gets on my calendar question or who becomes your mentee and that type of thing. I think it's actually, I try to look at it and shape it and scope it in the same way that I look for mentors myself, where it's like, what is the unique value that I add to this young man or young woman in the stage of life that they are in right now? Because I think it's not only important to help to set that and phase that and frame it for them, just in terms of basic expectation management, time management, all that kind of thing. But I also think it's an important training mechanism for how they want to think about that process going forward. When people say they're looking for, advice on this element or advice on that element, or something that I do not feel like I'm an expert in, or the best person to talk to, I have no problem saying that. If someone says, I want to reach out to you because I want to talk to you about ways that we can, I'm looking for at Save the Whales operation that I'm doing. I have absolutely zero problem telling you, I love what you're doing. I'm not the right person for you to talk to. Just to be completely frank, I don't add value to what you're looking for or what you're trying to get done. And people might say that sounds harsh or it sounds rude. It's actually not. It's actually the thing that I feel like is the best advice that I can give to that person at that time. That you want to make sure that you are very targeted and specific and strategic about the time you're asking, the counsel you're asking, who you're asking it from. Because remember, for every conversation that you're having with somebody, that's a conversation you're not having with somebody who actually might be able to add more value. And so, I pride myself on the fact I do have a very, I would consider, a pretty robust list of mentees and people who I love working with, and I love giving them counsel. And we love just having conversations and chopping it up on how they're thinking and challenges they're having. I also pride myself on the fact that I feel like they might feel different, but the majority of conversations I have with them add value, because they're conversations that I feel like I can add value. And I do think it's important for mentors to be able to think about it in that way. Be gracious, be generous, be thoughtful though, about that. It's not just filling up a dance card. It's not doing it because it sounds like it's the fun thing to do, but be very strategic about the type of way you can help. And the ways that you feel like, I'm just not sure where I add value or this type of thing, then I think it's important for all of us to be honest about that as well. Because again, finite, not just for the mentee, but what is also finite is time for the mentor. And you want to be very thoughtful and careful about that as well.
Wes, I want to start by thanking you for being so generous with your time, and have one follow-up question. And this gets really personal. And it's really, so how do you function on a daily basis? Everybody looks at other people and they go, well, how does Wes maintain his energy? How does he stay even keeled? How does he stay focused? How does he mentor so many people? Everybody's got their own techniques for maintaining your balance, maintaining all those things about you. What are the secrets behind the curtain that Wes Moore does?
Oof. I'm still trying to figure it out, sir. One thing that I have, it's interesting because pretty early on in this COVID-19 crisis, and we were speaking about it earlier, I started noticing very early in the process, that just because people were working remotely does not mean that we're working less. In fact, in many ways, it means we're completely working harder and more than ever before. Adam Grant actually just had a study that I read, maybe about a month and a half ago, where he talks about, he estimates that people are working 15% harder and 15% longer now that we've been in this remote status. And I started actually trying to come up with mechanisms of forcing our team to slow down. So whether it's things like everyone needs to have a mandatory hour during work hours, that is basically just your time off. You can't do it at 8 o'clock at night. You can't do it like between traditional human work hours. I need you to take an hour and I need you to put it on your calendar, right? Things like this. I need to see a list of the PTO days that people are taking. Not so people are saying, oh, I'm taking PTO. Show me where you're taking your PTO days so I know you're actually taking time off. How do you come up with different ways of being creative and that type of thing that you're trying to maintain and manage mental health? And it was actually interesting because I think it was actually something that, that we actually even learned from the military, was while the officers can put together these instructions, the question then became, but were the officers doing it themselves? And I think that became, how do you help the helpers? How do you, the ones who I'm leaning on, make sure your people do this, make sure your people do that, but I'm not making sure that they're doing it. And they're not making sure that I'm doing it. And so one thing I try to do is, there are certain things in my life that give me joy. And I have a wonderful team of people who really try to do it, who try to make sure that those things are protected. And you're not going to penetrate that, right? I like getting on the water. Being on the water gives me joy. Going hiking, going running gives me absolute joy. In fact, my wife always laughs because she's like, I came up in Baltimore and I came up in the Bronx. She's like, I have never met anyone who came up in the Bronx and Baltimore who likes the water. She's like, most people I know can't swim. It's like, where did that even come from? And honestly, the truth is, I think a lot of it actually came from the military. I was just exposed to a different part of the world and different things that for many people they came up enjoying. And I never really had the pleasure of experiencing until I got older. And now I'm just completely addicted. You know, the time that I spend now with my, you know, with my children, and people think it's, you know, people might think it's odd or whatever like that, but, you know, and I'm like, whatever, but like, I will schedule that time in my calendar. And people might say that sounds crazy, whatever. How do you mean schedule time? I mean, and like, what I mean is I schedule that time in, and you can't get on that calendar when it's like, you're taking your kids to X, you're taking your kids to Y. You know, I'm playing chess with my daughter, and people are like, that sounds crazy. I was like, no, there's a reason for it. There's a reason, because once it's on there, it's protected. And I think there is something that we have to be able to do is just really line out what gives us joy, what gives us peace, what gives us stability. And then your job, and frankly, the job of the folks, you know, all your anchors, their job is to make sure that's protected. No one penetrates that, because it still goes back to this idea that if a person is, you know, if a person is hard charging for 6 months, and in that 7th month they burn out, you have done me no good. And you're not helping the mission. You're not helping your teammates. We have got to make sure we're preparing this thing for the long run. And that means actually being incredibly disciplined and diligent about preparing for the long run as well.
Yeah, that's really well said, Wes. And sometimes I think people think it's selfish to be disciplined. And I actually think it is selfless to protect yourself, because maintaining yourself as the best person you can be is what you can give most to your family, to the people that you support, and that sort of thing.
Amen.
So I just gotta tell you how much Chris and I and everybody on our team thanks you for what you do on a daily basis with the Robin Hood Foundation, but more for taking the time today as well. It's just really special, and thanks for the friendship.
Listen, honestly, this is beyond my honor. Every time I get a chance to be around you both, I am better because of it. And to be with you, to have not just served under you, but to be, you know, to now serve right alongside in this very long fight that we're all engaged in. It's just a true joy. So I thank God for you both, and I'm just incredibly grateful. So sincerely, thank you.
Take care, my friend.